The Octagon House was built in the late 1850s by John Blauvelt, Jr. Over the years, the building has served not only as a home for two other mayors, George Huff and Jules Schwenker, but has been used for various commercial establishments, a restaurant, real estate and insurance offices, a beauty parlor, and currently a limousine service and florist. The Old Stone Church was the original St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which was begun in 1894, with local farmers contributing stones from their fields. The land was donated by Montvale's first mayor, Jacob Turkiel, and his wife, Cora. The design was furnished by one of the most prominent architects in the country, Samuel Burridge Reed. The first services were held in the church in 1895, and it remained the home of St. Paul's congregation until the new church on the hill was built in 1958. Montvale School No. 2 on East Grand Avenue derives its name from the original one-room wooden school it replaced on the same site. After Fieldstone was constructed in 1966, the building was closed as a school. In 1904, Parkridge became the first town in the Pasack Valley to install electric service when it dammed the Pascack Brook and built an electric generating plant. It flooded 12 acres of meadowlands that are still known today as Electric Lake. The water from the dam powered an electric generator housed in the basement of the brick structure to the side of the dam. By 1907, 18 customers were using power from the plant. In 1908, the dam was raised 5 additional feet to increase the water power available, and Electric Lake grew from 12 acres to 20. And in 1919, Parkridge shut down the plant and began to purchase power from outside electric providers. Resting like a jewel in the suburban town of Parkridge, New Jersey, is the Wertendike Barn, a county-owned Dutch barn farm museum. The Wertendike family maintained the land as a working farm from 1735 to 1851, when the farm was sold. The Parkridge Depot is a classic example of railroad Gothic with its board and batten siding, balloon frame windows, shaped to reflect the roofline, and decorative barge boards. Constructed in the 1870s, it remained in use until the 1960s. In the 1970s, it was considered for demolition, but when New Jersey Transit took over control, the stations were leased to the towns, and in 1981, Parkridge began the process of funding and implementing a renovation of the station. The first train pulled into the Hillsdale Railroad Station on Christmas Eve, 1869. At that time, Hillsdale was the end of the line for the new railroad. This made it unique in that the site housed not only the station, but the turntable where the engines could be turned for the southbound journey. The Hillsdale Station House itself was unique in being a 2-story structure which contained an upper level where the railroad company maintained offices for its officials. These upper-story rooms were later used for meetings by the Fire Association and various political groups, and even for services by the Episcopal Church. In 1925, on a plot donated by Mrs. Helen Riley, St. John the Baptist Church was built and dedicated. The first pastor was Cornelius A. Corcoran. The church served the community in its original building for 43 years, until Thanksgiving Day 1968, when a new church was opened. The structure fell into disrepair over the years after the church moved out. In 1989, interior designer Ron Nathan purchased the building and, after extensive repair and renovation, reopened it as Ron Nathan Interiors. Much of the basic exterior design was maintained during the renovation. Inside the building, the upper levels of the design gallery are still under the original beamed roof that sheltered the congregation when it was a church. The Hillsdale Public Library was originally started in January 1936 in a small shop on the site now occupied by Hillsdale Paint and Wallpaper. The library found its permanent home in 1937 when the building it now occupies was purchased from Harry Verath for $20,000. Westwood's Veterans Memorial Park has always been the social center of Westwood. The picturesque bandstand, also known as the gazebo, sits on the triangular section of the park. The bandstand was built in 1922 at the suggestion of Mayor Irving Brickell. It was constructed entirely by volunteers using donated funds and materials. In 1870, the railroad was extended to Westwood and on to Hillsdale. The increased flow of travelers to the town led to increased demand for travel services. Constructed in 1877, this building housed the Meyers Park Hotel, which provided meals and accommodations to visitors arriving by train. Over the years, the building has continued to serve as an eatery of one form or another, always with the word Park in its name, until its present tenant, the Iron Horse Restaurant, purchased it. When the railroad went through the Pascack Valley in the 1860s, stations sprang up in all the towns along the way. Generally, they were the board and batten style with wide overhangs to protect the passengers. The Emerson Station followed the style until the 1940s, when the overhangs were trimmed and the building faced with brick. When passenger service declined, it was converted to a retail store. The American Legion post in Emerson is located in the Peter de Bourne home. This structure dates to before 1797 and remained in the de Bourne family until 1868. It was sold to several subsequent owners. The building now known as the Emerson Hotel was built shortly after the railroad came through, on land owned by George W. Wallace, which he purchased in 1872. In 1890, he sold it to August Block, who had managed the business known as the Etna House and continued to do so until 1907. It was also known as Block's Hall. Lacking a Borough Hall, the town held council and other meetings here. Oradell's railroad station was built in 1890. A Hackensack newspaper of the day reported that it was the finest on the line. It replaced the 1869 depot, built when the railroad was extended from Hackensack to Hillsdale. The Delford Volunteer Fire Department was organized in January 1897. Not long after the fire department was formed, this firehouse was built on land donated by Richard Cooper. The old building continues in use today as the Little Firehouse Theater. The Oradell Episcopal Church got its start in Edmund Maple's home on Grove Street, and later in Oradell Lecture Hall, where the newly formed congregation held their first Easter services in 1901. A year later, Easter services were the first services held in their own new church. The bell from the lecture hall now hangs in the church belfry. The bloodiest skirmish in North Jersey during the American Revolution occurred on Rivervale Road. On a cold night in September 1778, a force of dragoons, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Baylor, were camping in barns and farmhouses along Rivervale Road. They were attacked while they slept by British soldiers and bayoneted to death. American militia dispatched to the site after the battle buried some of the bodies in abandoned tanning vats along the Hackensack River. In 1967, when the land was being readied for development, local historians searched for and found the bodies of 5 dragoons in the old vats. The millstone which now marks the spot was from the same tannery as the abandoned vats. Leopold Herman, Rivervale's first fire chief, constructed Herman's Grove in the early 1930s as a beer garden and recreation area. The Grove continued in popularity until the early 1970s. The main building at the Grove was remodeled into the town hall, and today the Grove is also the site of the library and veterans monuments. 7 Chimneys is the oldest house in the township of Washington, and it is an impressive example of 18th century regional architecture and an important remnant of the community's early settlement period. High on a grassy knoll in the southern portion of the township, the house was built in 1745 by the Zabriskie family, with many additions made in the 1700s and 1800s.